Kendrick Lamar, 2015, To Pimp a Butterfly. 10 years this album has existed. And 1 week since I started listening to it again. October 28th, 2025. It was a rainy day, and I was in my room. And given the circumstances of that day, I was thinking, the last couple records I've gotten into that I've made videos about I've been on walks, one during the day, one during the night. Maybe I'm gonna try and re-listen to a record that I can really sit down and study, in my room, and really focus on the writing and the musicianship, and just a concept of a whole record. And speaking of that, this is the first concept album that I'm gonna cover on this, I guess, series that I've made. I don't know if I'd call it a series, but I am calling it that right now. I don't know what else to call it, but I got back into and pulled up on my phone. I got back into To Pimp a Butterfly. Here it is on my cellular device there. And so, what does it mean that this is a concept album? What does that mean for this episode? I'll tell you. It means that track by track, I'm going to break down the concept of the record and the whole narrative of it, because this is a narrative-based album. And some people don't agree with that. Some people don't see it as a narrative album. And I think that's really because it's so complicated. This is a very complex and intricate and a very lyrically dense album, musically dense too, I'd argue. And it's hard to just sit down and connect the pieces and connect the dots. I mean, just from listening to it one go, I don't know if it can even be done, connecting every single piece and tether together. But I think I have something at least interesting, and I'll try to describe my thoughts fully and detailed throughout this video. The last video was as long as that album. I think it may have been longer than Kid A, the album. So I don't know how long this is gonna be, and this is the longest album we've done too, hour 19. Just gotta see my notes. Musically, okay. Musically, I already talked about the musicianship. I mentioned it, but musically, I forgot to mention this West Coast rap. This is conscious rap, and that statement will become more and more obvious the longer this video goes. And it'll seem funnier for me to say and clarify at the start of this by the end. And this is a jazz rap album. Now, think about jazz rap for a second. It came out of the 90s. Think, jazz rap, what came from jazz rap was it was samples, and then modern day rappers would come and rap over them. But musically, the catch or the concept of this album is that it's actual jazz being played, not actual jazz. It's these original jazz compositions that are being played and performed in the studio with Kendrick Lamar just rapping over them. So, just a pretty cool concept on its own. But, I mean, what else is there? Should I save this for the end of the video? I'll say it now. What makes this album special? A lot of things make this album special, but the first thing that sort of comes to mind is that this is the only album I can really think of and name off the top of my head that really does play out and seems to be structured like a classic novel. You hear people talk about the great American novel, To Kill a Mockingbird, Of Mice and Men, Invisible Man, Grapes of Wrath. And this, I mean, the story of this album and the themes that it deals with and the way the story moves, and there are characters in this story, it really does feel and just seem like one of those classic novels, and it came out 2015. So it just makes you wonder, like, where did this come from? How did he manage to make something like this? uh and I guess you'd have to ask Kendrick how he did it. I wasn't there. I wouldn't be able to tell you. But I'm going to go track by track and tell you what I think it's all about, I suppose. Track one is Wesley's Theory. It's the start. Um, and it is a crazy ass intro. It, maybe could be the best song of all time. I'm going to say that a lot in this video. It starts out with the vinyl crackling and the Boris Gardner sample. And just the bit of that sample and the title of that sample, it kind of tells you what the song is going to be about before it even starts. And it's also cool because in the context of the song, of this track one, it has the meaning of, black people being exploited and being, used for stardom. But by the end of this album, it will have taken on a separate meaning. So it's almost like a foreword for, going back to the novel comparison, it's like a foreword for the rest of the text. So that goes on, and then it goes full funk. It goes, hit me, and then it turns into this it's just a funk song. It kind of bum rushes you. Thundercat is on this. He comes in with like the craziest bass line ever. I don't know how the hell he even conceived of that in his mind. It's like, it legitimately isn't. You see it tabbed out, you see it mapped out. It's like a painting. I mean, it doesn't even make sense. Um, and then Kendrick comes in and he's rapping. He's playing himself like at the start of his career, where he's like, when I get signed, when I get money, I'm going to do whatever I want. And I'm going to have a great time. And I'm going to make as much as I can out of having all this new money. Thundercat comes in and he's doing the Chappelle Show bit. And musically, chord wise or progression wise, song kind of sounds like you're falling down a hole, like you're falling down the spiral, which is probably intentional. It's like you're falling down a rabbit hole, which is cool for the intro of an album. But and then a little interlude. Dr. Dre, who executive produced this album, he calls Kendrick up on the phone, and he says, it's easy to get to his spot in success and stature, but the hard part is keeping it, which will be returned to later in the record, you know. And then the track starts getting real, you know. There's a voice talking to Kendrick, and it's America. It's the United States talking to Kendrick, and it's trying to coerce him into being exploited, financially exploited. And that goes back to the title, Wesley's Theory, because it's a reference to Wesley Snipes, who was imprisoned for tax evasion because he was exploited and screwed over by, America's tax laws. And George Clinton is on this track too, of Parliament Funkadelic. He shows up and he kind of drives the bus. He moves the bus around your ears, and it's crazy. He says, look both ways, cross my mind, and he literally crosses your mind. He goes between your ears like a wizard or something. Now, think of this as the novel again. It's not just an intro for this album. It's not just an intro to the story. It's introducing you to Kendrick Lamar. This is his starting point, just in general, career-wise, story-wise, man-wise. This is your first impression of Kendrick Lamar. This is his starting perspective, and it gives you the antagonist. It gives you the villain right away. It, you know, like all great stories, you have a hero and the forces it is trying to defeat. And the villain of this, it's really takes on a few forms, you know, and these show up and appear and disappear throughout the course of the whole thing. And then the song stops, and the saxophone comes and honks a couple times, and it leads into For Free, an interlude, and it's full jazz. It's full on jazz music, like 60s jazz, like complicated changing time signature jazz. I'm pretty sure it's in like 7/8 or some shit. I really don't know. And this girl shows up, and she does not like this Kendrick guy. She hates this guy because he's not of use to her anymore. So, what could this be? She's America too. She represents the United States. She represents the government. Let's say in track one, the voice represented America's financial system. This is America's government. It's a vacuum. And lost my train of thought. Track two, this more represents America's government in general, that is so used to exploiting and using Kendrick, and is being compared to, you know, this woman who is using Kendrick for money, for fame, for you know, everything he's worth, but his dick ain't free. This dick ain't free, and that's a double meaning. He's saying that his dick is not being sold. It's not a product that you can just buy and use. But he's also saying that it isn't free, as in it's restrained, as in it's caged, as in it's being held back, you know. And you hear, as the song goes, you kind of realize that this is not a regular West Coast like record. This is not a regular California rap record, you know. He's like, this is track two, by the way, and he's going like full beatnik generation poetry, like over this jazz, and he's rapping over it like he does this every day. And it kind of throws you off guard. And going back to the novel, this is sort of Kendrick's side of his argument with America. Track one was America's offer to Kendrick, and track two is him making it an argument, and he is it's his side and his perspective of that argument. And near the end of the track, when he's like, pension, more pension, my consensus, he speeds up to match the speed of the drums, and he just keeps going and going and going, and it's so cool, and it's so complicated, and I don't know how he did that. And it's awesome. And then saxophone comes back in, and the girl, he says he's not a king. Next song is King Kunta, and this is the most West Coast one on the record, which is right after maybe the least West Coast record on this album. And this one may even be the best song of all time. And think of it like a novel. This is like the full introduction to Kendrick's character. You know, skip ahead in time. This Kendrick has seen success. He's an established artist, and you know, he's on top of rap. He's on top of the world, and from the way he carries himself, it's like he's on top of anything he wants. You know, he's not gonna bow down to anybody. He is, you know, he's his own person. And what'll happen through this album is that this character will change, and it'll evolve, and it'll turn into someone else. But the start of this character is pretty cool. Just even starting out, you know, and the beatness is so cool too. It's G funk, but by the end of it, it turns like it like goes backward in time. It's like turns into P funk full on with like the guitars at the end that go crazy like hardcore, and the beat starts like kind of minimal, and then as it goes, it gets more things get added on, and it becomes this full bullheaded beat that just rams its way through your headphones, and it's the progression of it is so cool. You know, oh, it starts out small and it gets bigger over time, like Kendrick Lamar is saying he did in this song. He runs the game, has the whole world talking. He's big now. That may be a stretch, but you gotta, I don't know, you gotta trust me on that. What does he say? He says the yam is the powers that be. You can smell it when I'm walking down the street. And the yams they symbolize things that have power over you, forces or beings or things that exhibit power over those. He says the yams brought out of Richard Pryor, manipulated Bill Clinton. Think, the Hollywood industry, cocaine, lust, things that we submit to that hold power. And it's similar to a great novel, Things Fall Apart, where having the most yams is a symbol of status because more food for your family, and it's a sign of respect. So Kendrick has he has the yams, he has the status, and he goes against ghostwriters in this. He's not like he's too big for that. He's too good for that rap wise, And this is just his like entrance announcement for this album. And then a gunshot happens. He says, by the time you hear the next pop, the funk will be within you. And then a gunshot happens again. And it is. The funk is within you. He's right. And then the guitars show up and it's crazy. And then it stops. And he starts speaking. He says, I remember you were conflicted, misusing your influence. And this is the start of a poem that shows up. It shows up all throughout this album on a bunch of the songs, and it'll keep going and expanding every time it reappears. And the next song is called Institutionalized. And it starts out very spacey, very airy. It starts out inside like somebody's mind, like they're trapped inside the walls of the ghetto and they're used to it, and it's affected their behavior, and they are institutionalized, like the name of the song. And then we leave their mind, we leave out the head, and it becomes like this jazz boom bap. And this is when you realize that this is a full on sort of jazz rap record. That's when you start to that's probably the moment where you start to like fully get what you're in for music wise. And in terms of the story, this is the first anecdote. This is the first real event of the story. The track one was like an intro, was like a just as an exchanging of words between Kendrick Lamar and our villain, America, who we'll see another form later. Track two was his side. Track three was the introduction of Kendrick. This is the first serious event of this album. And he says, I remember you were conflicted, misusing your influence. And this song is about Kendrick bringing a friend of his to the BET Awards. And his friend, he only knows how it is, where he's from in this lower class ghetto. And he tries to rob the artists at the BET Awards. They're walking licks. They have all this stuff on them. And they're not doing anything with it, and he just has to sit there and watch, or stand there and watch. So that's his friend's misuse of influence, or Kendrick's misuse of influence by bringing him. I wouldn't say that. I'll say it's his friend's misuse of influence, you know, by making his impression on those artists in that way. And Snoop Dogg shows up and he's like the narrator, because Kendrick's not the narrator in this song. He becomes a character as the one who takes his friend to the award show and shows him all this stuff. You know, you can't rob people at an award show. That's generally looked down upon in most cultures. So, and the chorus is Kendrick's grandma, and she's saying shit don't change until you get up and wash your ass, which is very wise. It's a very soulful chorus, and really, Bilal is singing the chorus on this, former Soulquarian. I'll bring up the Soulquarians at the end of this. Now, next song is called These Walls, and the poem comes back, says, I remember you were misusing your influence. Sometimes I did the same, and that sets up this song. And it's this girl moaning at the start of the song, which is you always gotta love when a song starts with that. And what do they say? Sex. And then it actually starts. And the moaning is actually pretty accurate for what the song is about. I mean, this may even be the best song of all time. Musically, it feels almost indescribable. Like, it is so smooth and it is so silky, and it's like velvet cushions all over, and it's a full like neo soul sort of deal. And Kendrick he comes on and he's rapping about, this pussy that he's getting. And so you think that's what the title means, these walls, the walls of this woman. And Kendrick's talking about he's really like analyzing and, studying this woman, like what she needs, how she feels, who she is. He's studying these walls and how he sort of fits into her life, how he fits into her situation that she's in. What do you say? Demolition might crush. Every time I come around, demolition might crush, because he's deep in it. He's deep in the pussy. And the next verse, he's talking about sort of being enclosed inside a box. Like, he's being thought of as one thing or a certain thing, a certain role, when he is more than that, and he's more complex. He fulfills multiple roles, and he's a three-dimensional person. And so then you think, okay, it's these walls, not just this woman's walls, but the walls of being recognized as a certain role and in a specific context. To this girl, he's in the walls of being like this certain guy, but he's playing a role for her, and he says, every time I come around, demolition's gonna crush, as in he will prove to her that he's more than just, a part-time lover, perhaps. He'll prove to you that he's more than what's expected or believed of him. And then the last verse, it gets serious again. So the woman that he's getting with, is the ex-girl of the man who killed his friend in his last album, which I haven't covered, but you probably know what that's all about. And he's using this girl for revenge against this guy, because he is locked up in jail and he can't do anything about her. So that's his misuse of influence, that he's using this girl for sex in order to punish this guy for his transgressions, And in the story, this introduces, that moral grayness to the character of Kendrick in this. You know, he's been introduced. He's as this like successful artist. He's on top of the world, and this is his first like ethical dilemma. You know, is this right? Should he be doing this? You know, is this okay? Um, Clearly not, because he says he's abused his power, full of resentment. In the poem that ends the song, he says he was screaming in a hotel room, and he was. In the next track, "You," which may even be the best song ever made, but it's a little too early to say that. You know, he says, "Loving you is complicated." He's just being alive, just living as himself and existing with his actions and what he's done is hard. It's complicated. It's too much to deal with at one time. And this is a two-part song. The first part, I think, is Kendrick sober, and he's mad at himself for what he thinks are his failures, and he's in denial that he has any importance or value to the world at all. You know, he says his sister had gotten pregnant. She was only a teenager. Kendrick was on tour and he was too busy and he couldn't stop it from happening. And, you know, he's just yelling at himself. And then it just builds up and builds up. And the song kind of like cracks in half. And it goes into the second part where I think it is a drunken Kendrick who is not angry at himself, but he's disappointed in himself because he thinks he's sinned. You know, he was too busy on tour again to come back to home, come back to Compton, and see some of his friends before they died. One of his best friends was in the hospital, and he didn't even take the time to go and see him before he died. He had to FaceTime him instead. And think of this in the story. This is his lowest point. This is the moment of the story where you see the fall. You see the negativity, and you see the depression, and you see the self-hatred of this character. You know, there's more depth added to this person, to the persona of Kendrick Lamar in this story. You know, and this is the point where for the rest of the album he has to climb out of. You know, he has survivor's guilt, he has depression, mood swings, everything, and he's admitting on this record and on the track that he thinks he should have killed himself a long time ago because all he's done is let down himself, let down the people around him, and it just isn't worth it. You know, it's like these two sides of Kendrick come together to share this hatred and disappointment for the person that they're combined to become. And the beatedness is kind of weird. Um, it's sort of like off kilter, but there's still a saxophone and the keyboard comes in and everything, and it's still in that jazz world that the album gives you. You know, there's always that continuity. Every time you think a song is a complete curveball, it reels you back in because it has those elements that make this record what it is. I don't know if there's a single song on this record that fully moves away from the jazz rap stuff. And this album covers a lot of bases musically anyway, but there's always sort of that jazz or funk on a lot of songs that influences in there, you know. And the bottle is clinking, and the song just it ends. It finishes. So it's like, where do we even go from this song? This is the lowest point. And the next song is called "All Right," and this choir shows up. These choir pre-recorded voices. It goes da 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 da. So you're like, okay, this is Pharrell. This is a full-on Pharrell beat that he gave to Kendrick. They added the jazz stuff later, sort of polished it up. What does he say? He says, "I'm fucked up, you're fucked up, but if God's got us, then we'll be all right." And this is that sort of building up of hope from the previous track, from the lowest point. This is Just this statement alone is, you know, that little piece of hope that gives this album enough to keep on going, that gives it more fuel and strength, because it's like that unity of community. It's not just I'm gonna be all right. If we're both fucked up and if God's got us, then we'll all be all right as a community, as a people, right? And this may even be the best song of all time. You know, Kendrick is Kendrick raps like crazy on this song. He gets really crazy with the flow. You know, we hate Popo, want to kill us dead in the streets for sure. But like through it all, through these uh through this suffering, ultimately black people will be all right. That's what it's all about. You know, that this community, that the black community will be all right, ultimately through the eyes and through the grace of God. And he brings up God in this song, and that actually kind of begins the Christian themes and uh, sort of character of this album. You know, this does delve into religious sort of Christian ideas and Christian characters, and it'll actually go into the next song. You know, that'll really be made clearer. And the first verse is just pure build up. You know, it's just telling you why it's Kendrick saying all this. You know, story wise, think back to the story. This is the first little bit of like real hope in the story, and this is the first sign of Kendrick being a voice for his community and Kendrick being a leader, which we'll come to realize is what this story becomes all about, and what the story has really been all about since the very beginning, you know, no matter how hard it is to tell. And the second verse comes in, and it's the same proposal as track one, but it isn't from America, it's from Lucifer. It is from the devil, saying himself. So there's that comparison between the United States and Satan, which is pretty interesting. You know, she offers what do you want, a house? What do you want, a car? 40 acres and a mule. 40 acres and a mule is a reference to America's failed compensation plan for emancipated slaves after the Civil War. And it's all temptation for Kendrick. It's all tempting him. But he says, my rights, my wrongs, I right till I'm right with God. In that moment, he rejects that temptation. And then the song it fades out, but it sort of ends with that moment of weakness still. He says, dark nights in my prayers. And the poem comes back, and he says that Kendrick is running for answers. And the next song is called For Sale Interlude. For Free was the second track. For Sale is the next interlude. And it's heightened temptation from this devil, from Lucifer, because they're trying to coerce Kendrick into selling his soul. And it's told through terms of like he's selling out musically, but it represents him selling his soul to the devil. And the music in this is extremely jazzy, and it's sort of reminiscent of These Walls in terms of like being silky and smooth, but there's also that very sinister undercurrent that is like lurking beneath it the whole time, you know, behind the velvet veil a little bit. And in the story, it's the temptation part of the story. Think about the hero's journey. This is the part of the story where the hero comes face to face with the villain, and the villain is, you know, trying to get him to join their side, is trying to get him to, you know, reconsider his role in his trek and his life. And think Jesus being tempted in the wilderness, going back to the Christian thing. Not saying that Kendrick is Jesus, that's kind of correct. And maybe that's for a later day, but you know, He's and the it's one verse the whole song, and it's pretty like abstract because Kendrick is he's giving voice to Satan, he's playing Satan, but he's also giving his own viewpoint at the same time, and it's sort of mixed in with it, so it's not too easy to distinguish which is which. But I think it's like a dream sequence. If we were to take this as a movie, this would be the sort of dream sequence of this record or a story or whatever. And the beat just keeps going, and you realize that it's this kind of like jam session that Kendrick is just rapping over, and they just keep going and improving and jamming, and it fades out, and then the poem comes back around, and it says that Kendrick he was running for answers until he came home. And the next song is called Mama. The beat in this is so nuts. The beat in this is actually nuts. It's like weird, like wonky LA beat sort of stuff. And it's still smooth though. I don't know what For Sale I think was in like I think is in waltz for a bit of it. It changes because jazz like that's the only rhythm in the whole thing. And I think Mama is in like 5. I don't know what kind of time it's in. It's like it's like a cowbell sound for percussion in it. I don't know what exactly it is, but it's still jazzy and it's still very soulful and and very danceable. It is unbelievably danceable. And the song lyrically is about Kendrick. He has come back home. The second verse, he's like, I know everything. Like he thinks he's a fully conscious person now. He knows how the world works. He knows how people work. He knows how the streets work. He knows that he knows how all of it works. But none of it even compares to the knowledge given to him once he's come back home. And for a while, you think it's Compton, California, his literal, birthplace, his literal home, but it actually is South Africa, which he visited in, I believe, 2014, and which inspired him to write a lot of the material for this album. So, Mama, the title of it actually is referring to the motherland, South Africa, you know. And the third verse, he talks about this little kid who looks just like him, and he's telling him about, there's real stuff going on here, and you don't really know about all this because you're so successful and you're so famous, and that's kind of blinded you to actual conscious stuff. And that's when he realizes, you know, that's his like this is the moment in the story where he comes back to reality, and he sort of this is his first like little hint of purpose. This is the first like moment where his goal or his aspiration, the whole point of the story is sort of teased for the first time, and it becomes more developed and uh, drawn out later. Maybe not drawn out, but oh, then there's this like interlude at the end where he's like Kendrick trying to find peace, and it's this like kind of hype like like a couple of the tracks have those like little interludes that move into the next song. And the next song, Hood Politics, actually kind of starts with an interlude, and it's a full like not full, but it is full on Thundercat. Like he 100% made that opening to Hood Politics and just gave it to Kendrick. I don't know about the rest of the song, the whole song, but that intro is definitely Thundercat. And it's this voicemail of a friend of his. And this song is the literal homecoming that was mentioned earlier, where him returning to South Africa, or him coming to South Africa, was a figurative homecoming. This is a literal homecoming. This is in remembrance of Compton, California, where he grew up was raised in his hood. You know, the beat the beat comes in. He says he's been A1 since day one, and he calls stuff boo boo. And that's something that I've been saying in real life for the past few days. Bit of a tangent, but this song is like, it's Kendrick trying to stay relatable and trying to, reconnect to a city because he's a successful artist and, he's all over the world. But, you can't just lose relevance with the people. He's one of those artists that, like, he can't lose his roots from where he came from. He feels he can't, like, really afford to do that. So he's going back to, how he grew up, how the streets work, like we mentioned in the last track. And even still, there's that really, like, political perspective that is talked about and expanded on in a few of the tracks. He says there's nothing new but a new spew of Democrats and Republicans. Red versus blue. It's the same thing that's going on in Compton, California, in the hood, just on a greater scale. It's the same, like, war. It's the same battle. Red state, blue state, which one you govern in? And there's the interlude that's like, Obama says what it do, bow now, wow now, which is crazy musically, but is also kind of saying, like, Barack Obama, president of the time, is trying to relate to Black people, trying to relate to this community, but what can he really do with all his power? Can he really, like, enact change? Is like, belief in him really worth it? And I guess that question sort of makes a comeback later. I haven't thought of that until right at this moment. But story, back to the story. This is it feels like a flashback in the story, but I don't think it is. I do think it is Kendrick trying to relate back, to youth and trying to get back to his roots in a literal sense. The poem comes back at the end, and he says he's entered a war. His friends were fighting a literal war. Kendrick is fighting a new war, this spiritual war. And then the next song is called How Much a Dollar Cost. Excuse me. And it's this full piano comes in, it's full on jazz. And Kendrick this is also a self-contained sort of narrative, another anecdote in the story. And it's definitely the most important anecdote in the story, I'm going to say. And this may also even be the best song of all time. So, back in South Africa, Kendrick is still there, and he's parked his car at a gas station. He's had this verbal misunderstanding with one of the workers who speaks Zulu. Kendrick does not speak Zulu. He doesn't know the language, and this homeless man has come up to him, and he's asked him for his currency's equivalent of $1. And Kendrick does not look on this man kindly, So he says, I'm not going to give you this $1. And then he shuts the door. And the homeless guy just stares at Kendrick. He just stares at him, and it kind of scares him. And he starts getting angry because this guy is making him angry. And he just feels this absolute, like, apathy and just disrespect to this guy because he thinks he's just some crack addict and he thinks he's just looking for handouts. And James Fauntleroy comes in on the chorus with the whole soul, like, popping in for a moment and then going back to Kendrick, who is kind of soulless in this song. That was a dumb thing to say. I'm sorry. And then he has this moment in the third verse where he has this, like, reflective moment where he's like, why am I so mad at this guy who's not really done anything to me? He's just asked me for $1, and he's just looking at me. I don't even know this person. And he almost like fully reconsiders it, but he doesn't fully get there. And he concludes that, he's gotten his success fully righteously, and he deserves every single piece of money that he has, no matter what, every crumb, every penny. And he tells the homeless man that there is no chance that he's going to give him money. And the homeless guy, he says that Kendrick has failed his test, and by failing this test, that he lost his chance to earn a place in heaven, because the homeless man was God in disguise, and Kendrick has lost the spiritual war. And Ronald Isley, who is one of the big Isley brothers, he ends the track. He's calling for this like repentance, like, help me change to right my wrongs. And it's this regret for what he's done. So that's definitely the most important anecdote in this story, because it's what gives Kendrick the character, it's what gives Kendrick the guy this motive to change, this full on motive to change, and to really look deep within himself and think about what he wants to do with his fame, what he wants to do with what he has, his money, his his voice, and what he wants to do for the people he knows and cares about. And then the piano comes, and then it fades out. And the next song is Complexion, a Zulu Love. And this song is full Thundercat. This whole song is definitely Thundercat. And Kendrick is rapping over it. And in the story, think back to the story, this this is part of sort of a trio of songs. I like to think of it as a trio of songs that talk about, being black. And it's just these messages on black culture, and it's like for black people. It's like little psalms, not psalm, but like these sort of important statements to black people. And this song is about, complexion, light skin, dark skin. It doesn't matter, because we are all, it's all one people. And I actually think this is the part of the story that is most similar to Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, where the main character in that book, he's living in Harlem, and he smells these yams from across the street. Going back to the yams from track 3, but it reminds him of his roots, and after finding these yams, that it ultimately is what makes him decide to speak for the rights of black people and become an advocate, which is what Kendrick is starting to do in this for the last little section of the album. And the first verse is from a perspective of a slave who is sneaking out to meet with this lighter skinned girl who's in the house. The second verse, I think kind of brings that to a modern day. It's like saying, have we really changed from that? It's still kind of that system, not as direct. And then Rhapsody shows up, North Carolina's very own Rhapsody. You gotta shout out. And she has this awesome verse, and it ties the whole song together. It's just like, color ain't a thing. It's just black pride. And then Kendrick, he is like this creepy voice effect going on. He's talking about something about hell on earth, and then the next song is called The Blacker the Berry. And I think this is, even counting you, I think this is the most hardcore song on the whole record, the most intense, and definitely the angriest in the whole album. It may even be the best song of all time, because in the story, this is Kendrick realizing all the way about the suffering of his people. This is his moment where he is fully conscious and he's fully coming to terms with how black people have suffered and how they've been treated by America and by people in power for centuries, genuine centuries. And he's talking about where he fits into that with his voice and, how he feels about all of this. He says he's the biggest hypocrite of 2015, and by the end of the song, you're going to know why. Then the first verse is complete black pride, unfiltered black pride. Assassin, he comes in for the chorus. He goes raga, because it's all universal. It's all universal issue. It's not just America. It's not just the U.S. It's all over the world. This, this mistreatment and this suffering, And he says, they say we're doomed from the start because we're black, but don't you know every race starts from the black, because all of humanity comes from Africa anyway. We all started from there, from the black. Second verse is just Kendrick frustrated, getting angered at this stuff getting thrown at him, just discrimination, lies. What does he say? Manipulation and lies, discrimination and something. I forget. But that's the second verse. And the third verse is the climax of the song, which is full condemnation of racism in any form, all forms. He says, I'm black as the heart of a fucking Aryan. And he's talking about the Zulu and the Xhosa tribes of Africa, and he compares them to the Pirus and Crips, Compton, California. They might go to war. And just a couple tracks ago, he compared them to the United States political system. So this is another comparison in that sphere, just through a different lens and through a different perspective. And the end of the track is like, it's not enough to own those certain stereotypes thrown towards black people, because ultimately it's not going to change that Kendrick Lamar, has participated in this gang violence that has killed his own people, that has hurt the people he's trying to help, ultimately, And that's sort of the question that the story raises you. We look back at the story element. That's sort of the question of it. Like, how can you help your people if you've done the things that you preach against, that you condemn? If you were a part of the problem, can you be forgiven, and can you change? And how much can you use your own voice for good, until your positive actions outweigh the pain that you've sort of wrought? And then the outro is very jazzy, and the song kind of fades out, and it just leaves you with that question. It leaves you with the last question he asks. And then the next song is You Ain't Gotta Lie, Mama Said, which it might be the most fun of the whole album. And that's actually kind of a theme with the last couple songs. Like How Much a Dollar Cost was very serious. This is a serious story about Kendrick losing empathy, and he's punished by God. And then the next song is just a more relaxed song about colors and all black people are connected. And then we had the most hardcore song on the record, and now it's another sort of lesson, probably the tamest lesson of all of them. It's like it's just talking about those people who feel like they need to play a character and they need to build up a lie in order to gain respect. But everybody knows that it's not real and that it's just a character. And he's just saying that you don't have to do all that to be cool with us. It's okay. And it's one of those things. It's like it's true for the rap game, but it's also just a real thing in real life. It has that sort of double meaning there. You know, and it's his last sort of contained statement for the black community, I think, in this section of the album. And it's very soulful. The group of voices show up in the back for the chorus. They're like, "You ain't got to lie," and it's cool. And then this crowd shows up. And they start talking. They start making noise. And Ronald Isley comes back, and then the next song is "I," and he's like, "Kendrick, you're like, I want the mic. He's been all over the world. We're bringing up nobody, 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 but the number one rapper in the world." Kendrick comes back in. He has the mic, and it's like set up like a live performance. He's come back to give some message. He's been through so much. He's been through the whole hero's journey. The whole story has happened in this album. Kendrick has, over the course of this hour-long record, Kendrick has changed as a person, and he has this message. He has this message he wants to tell people. What is it? What is he trying to say? He's saying that you have to love yourself in order to help others and love others. And this may even be the best song of all time. It's very catchy, and it's also a full groove, and it is so energetic and positive, and it's really the climax of this whole story, of this whole album. It's not the climax of the album, but it's the climax of the story. This is the contrast to the song "You," track 5. This is "I," you and I. That's that contrast. That was the most negative song, and that we've climbed out of the hole, and we've reached the most positive song on the entire album. Like, this is the moment where Kendrick has fully become a leader, and he's using his voice for good, and he's become fully conscious, and he's spreading his message through music. That is his method of spreading his message. And the third verse, he's explaining to everybody, he's dealt with these negative thoughts. He's gone through these hard moments because, that's where he gets his strength from. That's where all this positive stuff is coming from. And then the crowd, they start getting a little louder. They start getting louder and louder. And he tries to calm them down, but there's so much infighting and there's so much noise, and everyone is distracted from what Kendrick is trying to say. And so he's talking to the audience, and he gets back to the show. He's like, "We're gonna get back to the show," but he freestyles something before the last song. He's talking about the N-word and how it's sort of been used and manipulated to control black people. And at the beginning of the song, Ron Isley's like, "He's come back to give you some game," and he kind of does that at the end of the song. He's like, "This is the origin of the word, Ethiopian origin of the word." He gives them the word originating, and it means black emperor, black king, royalty, and that's the real meaning of the word. And America's hidden it, and it's been used and exploited against its own people. And Kendrick, he tells this all to the crowd, and they're all quiet by the time Kendrick gets to that point. They've been called to attention, and then Kendrick walks away. He fades out. And the last song is called "Mortal Man," and it's the outro of the story. If it was a chapter in the story, it'd be conclusion. And it may even be the best song of all time. Kendrick is bringing up Nelson Mandela. He has fully accepted his role as a voice, as a leader, as some prophet, but he has a question. He says, if shit ever goes south, if things ever, go off the rails a bit, will his followers still trust him? If he's ever plotted against, if he's ever made to seem like a fraud or a negative force, would his followers know that it's a falsehood, that it's a rumor based on what they know of Kendrick? Do they trust him enough in order to stick with him for as long as they need to? And it's question after question. Will Kendrick's girlfriend stay loyal to him if he was in prison for decades, as Nelson Mandela's girlfriend was, or his wife? Sorry, can he find spiritual immortality without dying, without losing his physical form? Will he reach the same fate as countless other Black voices and Black leaders who were left and forgotten and conspired against because they became too powerful, they became too loud with their voices? This is the conclusion of the whole story. It's question and question and question. And then he starts reading this poem. It's the poem that this whole album has teased. It's the full poem that we've heard again and again and again in this album. And it's describing the whole story. It's describing all the themes of the story. The whole message of this album is summed up in the poem. And he finishes it. And he asks somebody this question. And then the song becomes, it's not a song anymore, it's an interview. But who is he interviewing? Who is Kendrick talking to? Tupac. He's interviewing Tupac. And Tupac is talking about, he says poor people are going to eat the rich because of how wealthy and appetizing they're going to look. They're going to keep so much wealth for themselves, and the poor are going to be so hungry. He talks about he worked himself up from this menial, degrading job to a real profession that doesn't just help himself, that doesn't just make himself money, but it helps the people around him, it helps his people, ultimately. He's talking about, and they just go from subject to subject, like how Tupac focuses, how his history of being a fighter, how America really steals the soul of Black people after youth. And that's why young people are the future. They have to make change because, you're tired when you're older. You can't fight anymore. You're not as loud. You're not as, your spirit is sort of is quelled by everything around you. And Kendrick says, he makes a comment. He says sometimes he gets in the studio and he doesn't know what he's going to say. He doesn't know what energy he's going to put out onto the mic. And Tupac says straight to him, he says, because it's spirits. We're not even really rapping. We're just letting our dead homies tell stories for us. And then Kendrick reads another poem out, and it's about the meaning of the name of the album, To Pimp a Butterfly. Because the caterpillar is the average guy he's institutionalized by, his environment and his surroundings, and he's this gritty, sort of creature. And the cocoon is its environment. The cocoon is the hole lives in. But the butterfly represents a fully conscious and fully spiritual, fully realized human being. And it represents the beauty that the caterpillar is capable of if it focuses in the cocoon and breaks free. But the caterpillar sees the butterfly and it notices that people praise the butterfly and it sees the butterfly as weak. So the caterpillar pimps the butterfly to its own gain. But the butterfly's goal and the butterfly's challenge is to convince the caterpillar, show the caterpillar that it doesn't have to be this way and that the cycle can be broken, that, that they're trapped in the system, and that it doesn't have to be this way. And even though these two creatures, they have different forms and they seem so different, they're really the same person. They're really the same thing. And Kendrick asks Pac about it, and Pac doesn't answer. Pac is gone, and it's just Kendrick alone now. So, will he fly? So I think that's the story of the album. I think that's the narrative of it. And you notice every song on it is deeply important. I think this is the first album I've discussed on this where every song is not only musically amazing, but also very, they're all lyrically important. They're all part of the story. They're very important. And actually, going back to what I said, musically, every song on this is amazing. You notice as it goes along, it's so soul inspired, and it's really almost like a funk album, and it really like just takes all these influences and mixes them together into this very unique and very like different album. I really don't think anyone has ever tried something like this album musically really again since it came out. And I mentioned the Soulquarians earlier. Think about, actually I'm not even gonna tell you about the Soulquarians. I want you to look them up and do the research yourself and connect the dots on your own, because you will be nothing but rewarded by doing this. Really, like even if you go and listen to the music and look at the history, and all I'm going to tell you is that this album not only is akin to some classic novel, is not only this very musical, is not only insanely well produced, maybe the best sounding rap album ever made, is not only like I'd honestly go as far as to call it like a fulfilling of a prophecy of the Soulquarians, like the fulfilling of their musical prophecy. Like this is what it was all leading up to. This is what, almost like, think back to Jesus' biblical, time, like fulfilling of the prophecy. Not only that, but I used to not get why this record was taught in like college classes until sometime last week. Now I kind of get why it's taught in courses. I think if this record came out around the time of the novels that I mentioned throughout this video, Invisible Man, Grapes of Wrath, 20s, 30s, I think it would probably be as respected and looked at in a similar regard to those pieces of work. And it's so crazy to think about that this was only 10 years ago, that this sort of stuff is still like this is modern art. This is a 21st century album, and it may be the best album ever. There's, over the course of this week, I have gained a much deeper respect and a much deeper understanding of this album, and I think it's very cool, and I think you should listen to it if you haven't. I probably could have said that at the beginning of the video, but my voice feels really dry, so I'm gonna drink some water or something that helps it out.